Europe had provided approximately $10.4 billion in military aid between January and April 2025. But to maintain Ukraine's current military operations at 2024 levels, they would need to nearly double their recent $10 billion contribution per quarter to close the gap. For perspective, this amount exceeds the entire annual defense budget of countries like Belgium or Denmark. The European Union's total military aid to Ukraine in all of 2024 was $31.2 billion, meaning they would need to nearly double their annual contribution just to cover the American shortfall for 1 year. When news of these cuts reached Brussels in late February 2025, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called an emergency meeting within 48 hours. The initial reaction from European leaders reflected the gravity of the situation. French President Emmanuel Macron publicly stated that Europe faced a choice between strategic autonomy or strategic irrelevance. The meeting lasted 14 hours, with heated exchanges between Eastern European nations who demanded immediate action and Western European countries who questioned whether such massive expenditures were sustainable. The mathematics of the situation created an impossible equation for European treasuries. Germany's defense minister calculated that covering just their proportional share of the American aid reduction would require increasing their defense spending by an additional 0.4% of GDP. For France, the figure was 0.3%. Poland, already spending 3.9% of GDP on defense, would need to reach 4.7% to maintain current Ukrainian supply levels. These percentages translate to tens of billions of euros that European governments would need to find in their already stretched budgets. The military consequences appeared almost immediately on Ukrainian battlefields. By April 2025, Ukrainian forces reported a 43% reduction in artillery shell availability compared to the previous year. Advanced air defense systems that required American maintenance contracts began experiencing longer downtimes. The flow of precision-guided munitions, which had been crucial to Ukrainian defensive operations, slowed to levels not seen since early 2023. Ukrainian military commanders privately expressed concerns that without European intervention, they would be forced to adopt more defensive postures by summer. The crisis exposed deep divisions within European leadership that had been simmering for months. Poland and the Baltic states pushed for immediate, massive increases in military aid to Ukraine, arguing that Russian success would threaten their own security directly. Germany and France preferred a more measured approach, seeking to negotiate with both Washington and Moscow for a political solution. Italy and Spain questioned whether such enormous expenditures were justified when their own economies were struggling with inflation and unemployment. These disagreements created a 3-week period where European response remained fragmented and ineffective. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking in ways that European politicians had never experienced before. Unlike typical EU decision-making processes that could take months or years, the Ukrainian military situation demanded answers within weeks. Artillery stockpiles were depleting at rates that would become critical by June 2025. Training programs for Ukrainian personnel, previously funded by American contracts, faced cancellation by May. The usual European approach of lengthy consultation and consensus building simply couldn't match the urgency of the military timeline. The pressure created by this impossible timeline forced European leaders to consider options that would have been politically unthinkable just months earlier. Emergency sessions of national parliaments were called across Europe to authorize unprecedented defense expenditures. The German Bundestag held its first weekend emergency session in 15 years to approve additional military spending. The French National Assembly passed emergency legislation allowing the government to redirect funds from social programs to military aid without the usual legislative review process. European defense ministers began discussing something that had never existed before, a unified European military aid mechanism that could operate independently of both NATO and individual national decisions. The concept emerged from a simple recognition that Europe's current fragmented approach to military assistance was too slow and inefficient to respond to rapidly changing battlefield conditions. If America could cut aid by such dramatic amounts in 3 months, Europe needed systems that could scale up just as quickly. By late April 2025, the outlines of Europe's response began to emerge. The European Council authorized the creation of the European Defence Solidarity Fund, a financial mechanism specifically designed to provide rapid military assistance to European partners and allies. Unlike existing EU defense initiatives, this fund would operate with streamlined decision-making processes and pre-authorized spending limits that could be activated within days rather than months. The initial commitments to this fund shocked even the European officials who proposed it. France committed 47 billion euros over 4 years. Germany pledged 52 billion euros. Poland, despite its smaller economy, committed 23 billion euros, representing the largest military expenditure in Polish history. When all European contributions were tallied, the European Defence Solidarity Fund reached 247 billion euros, making it the largest pooled military fund in European history. This fund represented more than just money. It marked Europe's first concrete step toward complete military independence from American decision-making, creating a parallel system that could operate regardless of Washington's preferences. But the real transformation was just beginning. Europe's military spending revolution. By mid-2025, Europe's defense budgets rose by over 30% since 2021, creating the financial foundation for the most significant military transformation the continent had seen in decades. The speed of this change caught even European finance ministers off guard, as governments redirected hundreds of billions of euros toward military capabilities in months, rather than the typical multi-year budget cycles. The 2025 statistics reveal just how dramatic this shift became. By September 2025, 23 of 32 NATO countries had exceeded the 2% GDP defense spending threshold, with several aiming for 2.5 to 3% by 2027. Poland leads this group at 4.2% of GDP, representing a military budget that exceeds what the country spent on defense in the entire previous decade. Germany's defense spending jumped from 66.8 billion euros in 2024 to 88.5 billion euros by late 2025, making it the fourth largest military spender globally. France increased military spending to 64.7 billion euros, while Sweden's military expenditure surged by 34% to reach the NATO target of 2% of GDP in its first year of membership. European governments created entirely new financing mechanisms to fund this military expansion. The Netherlands established defense infrastructure bonds that allowed private investors to directly fund military projects in exchange for long-term government guarantees. These bonds raised 34 billion euros in their first 6 months, with institutional investors from pension funds to insurance companies purchasing them as stable, government-backed securities. Belgium followed with security investment certificates that offered tax advantages to companies investing in domestic defense production. The European Union activated the Stability and Growth Pact's flexibility clause, allowing member states to increase defense spending by an additional 1.5% of GDP without triggering fiscal oversight procedures. The European defense industry response has been nothing short of transformative. Major contractors like Airbus Defence and Space, Leonardo, and Rheinmetall are reporting order backlogs that extend into 2029. The European defense industry generated a turnover of 158.8 billion euros in 2023, a 16.9% increase from the previous year, with growth evident across military aeronautics, naval, and land sectors. European military exports reached 57.4 billion euros in 2023, up 12.6% from 2022. The industry added 581,000 jobs in 2023, an 8.9% increase that still cannot meet current demand. Ammunition production capacity represents the most. Dramatic industrial expansion. Europe ramped production from 300,000 artillery shells annually to nearly 1 million shells by 2025. Yet manufacturers still report waiting lists extending 18 months for new orders. Rheinmetall increased artillery shell production capacity by 340% in 2025, but cannot meet current European demand. MBDA, Europe's largest missile manufacturer, expanded production facilities in France, Italy, and the United Kingdom simultaneously, yet their waiting list for precision-guided munitions extends well into 2026.